I didn't come here to preach this morning, the preachers say. No, I didn't come here to preach, but a little angel on high whispered a sweet little melody of love in mine ear. And so I tell you, church, I gotta sang the song the way it was sung to me. I gotta tell the story the way it was told to me. I gotta bring that love message the way it was brought to me. And church, I gotta preach. So here it goes. According to attorneys at the Merit Systems Protections Board, thousands of Americans want a federal job. And since the days of Andrew Jackson, who gave to American politics the wonderful political adage that to the victor belong the spoils, there have always been those persons seeking a job and a secure, prestigious position in government who have noticed that it may be a good thing to get a little cozy with those who hold the levels of power, like the politicians, to get that job. A tradition that apparently survives for some even until today. But we can always blame the Russians if we are caught, apparently, and none will be the wiser, not even in the most educated by credential district in the United States, Virginia's 8th Congressional District, where one attempted bribe in 2016 has yet to be investigated, but back to that a little later. For now, if you were an educated enough voter to do perhaps a Google search, you might not be surprised to learn that most every federal crime is contained under Title 18 of the United States Code. Every single high crime and misdemeanor, a term very popular with those calling for impeachment these days if you were following the press. And you might even discover that under 18 U.S.C. 210, whoever pays or offers or promises any money or thing of value to any person, firm, or corporation in consideration of the use or promise to use any influence to procure any appointed office or place under the United States for any person shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. And apparently in Virginia's 8th Congressional District, that is wholly distinguishable from being the 13th highest donor to the Democrat National Committee and the Barack Obama campaigns, and being awarded in quid pro quo a prestigious ambassadorship to Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And if you think otherwise, well, it's because you must be ignorant. And if you persist, you may be crazy too, or worse. But, and this is your big but, here's an interesting political fact worth mentioning that actually appeared in the press. The New York Times, in fact. It is probably pretty accurate because of that very fact, right? According to a recent article published by the Pew Research Foundation, the House member with the most federal workers in his or her district is Democrat Representative Don Beyer, whose Virginia district includes 86,900 federal workers. In parents, among districts with no military bases, Democratic Representative Jerry Conley's neighboring Virginia district has the highest number of federal workers. Close parents. And if there is any symbiotic relationship that may be extrapolated or hypothesized from this political fact, you would expect the congressman with the most federal workers in his district, like the 8th Congressional District, or second, the 11th Congressional District, to be the most supportive congressman in the Congress to defend him. Just like you would probably, at least anecdotally, expect those federal government employees to, in reciprocation, as one hand washes the other and both hands wash the face, for them to return the favor in support, right? And you might be 100% correct or pretty close. According to Federal News Network, long before Donald Trump's long-shot bid to win the White House, unions representing federal workers and postal employees had almost exclusively supported Democratic candidates for the presidency, and with few exceptions, the House and Senate. They still do. Unions very, very quietly helped former Representative Tom Davis, Republican Virginia, and Frank Wolf, Republican Virginia. They worked closely with Democrats with clout, like Representative Steny Hoyer, Democrat Maryland, and Elijah Cummings, Democrat Maryland, and former Representative Henry Waxman, Democrat California, to sweeten meager pay raises proposed by the presidents Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. But mostly their endorsements, union PAC money, and logistical support goes to Democratic candidates and incumbents. Close quotes. But if you're surprised to find that unions tend to support Democrat candidates, then you have probably never wondered whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa. But how about federal employees themselves? Since we are all independent-minded and nobody controls us, or we say that's the case, right? Well, my daddy was a preacher, and he used to say, if you show me where a man spends his money, I can tell you who a man loves. Can I get an amen? Can I get an amen again? According to Federal News Network, U.S. government workers are often generous with time and cash in community events and as part of the combined federal campaign. But when it comes to giving money to a political party or candidate, most of them don't. The late Representative Morris K. Udall, Democrat of Arizona, a staunch friend of federal and postal unions, used to refer to white-collar feds, then called the classified service, as the calcified service because of their reluctance part with dollars on behalf of political candidates. Other Democrats have complained for years that when it comes to ponying up cash, feds hide behind the Hatch Act. Unquote. We all heard that. I would do it, but the Hatch Act. But there seems to be a recent change, as the same article states, that just before the 2016 presidential election, The Hill reported that federal government employees are opening their wallets to help Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump on November 8th. And this quote might be of interest to those curious by nature. You ready for this? It checked Federal Election Commission records and reported that of the roughly $2 million given by feds in 14 agencies, about $1.9 million, or 95%, went to Clinton, the Democrat. It said that Department of Justice political donors gave 99% of their money to Clinton, while at the State Department, which she once headed, only 1% of the reported political contributions went to candidate Trump. It said that Trump got $8,756 from Justice employees, compared to $286,797 at that date for Clinton. Of the political contributions from the Internal Revenue Service workers, 94% went to Clinton. The FEC data covered only contributions of $200 or more, and there is no way of knowing how many of the contributors were Democratic political appointees who had a vested as well as ideological interest in the Democrats retaining control of the White House, like maybe keeping their six-figure jobs for another 4 years, maybe 8 years. Many people believe that federal workers tend to vote more like their neighbors than on party lines. And others note that while feds have given more to Democrats over the past few elections, GOP candidate Mitt Romney got slightly more money from federal workers than President Trump. Close quotes. As far as political giving goes, most feds don't. Period. But of those that do, the vast majority donate to Democrat candidates. Does this hold for every part of the country where federal employees were threatened this year by the longest government shutdown in history? Victims of divided partisanship in the country. Some say that the highest partisanship in the government has ever experienced, according to one news source, not because they have any great support for the policies of that party towards which they lean, but because of its negative views of the policies of the opposing party, or perhaps even president. Well, per the Washington Post, in 2010, Gallup found that about 40% of unionized federal employees identified as Democrats, compared with 27% who identified as Republicans. Of those who were not members of a union, 33% were Republicans and 29% were Democrats. A plurality of this latter group identified as independent. In part, this is probably a function of job type. Unionized government employees are less likely to hold higher paying management jobs. But it suggests a near parity in partisan representation, whatever that means, right? But let's take a step back for historical perspective. Because those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it, somebody said, right? Well, since 1964, for which JFK had begun preparing the post-recession recovery budget just before that day in Dallas, the government was running what was, for the first time, an unusually large deficit. An even larger deficit was forecast for FY 1964. And according to a recent scholarly article just years ago, as the Bureau of the Budget consolidated the drafts of the budget proposals from across the government, it was clear that the budget that the president would put to Congress at the beginning of the new year would set new records at $98.8 billion. It was the largest budget outlay in the nation's history, topping the FY 1945 at the height of World War II spending. It came a large deficit anticipated to be about $11.9 billion, the second largest peacetime deficit. Would it surprise you to know that while deficits have continued to grow, that the number of federal government employees has actually decreased since 1964, moving in quite the opposite way of inflation? But you may have recalled a few things that may help you to explain this anomaly that have occurred since 1964 that may account for that drastic reduction in federal employees. with all the concerns about trade-offs between defense spending and social programs. Hint, hint. You may have seen a story about the withdrawal of troops from Southeast Asia a long time ago, and maybe even a peace dividend back in the 1980s. Volunteer Army, any of this thing sounding a little bit familiar? Well, the military personnel that our taxpayers are funding have actually decreased while war has transformed from a linear model to a more complex non-linear model, including cyber and terrorism, with an increasing range of considerations and threats, which have some more concerned about building walls against such vulnerabilities, while some others believe that sanctuary cities and putting classified emails on a personal server is a great idea. Intriguingly, with the difference of opinion correlated to levels of education, if you can believe that. And if you understand what we have raced through in this little civics lesson so far, then you are ready for why we took the time for review. But for those who did not take copious notes, our Democratic friends at the Department of Justice, let's pause for a second to review the most important points. Number one, the congressmen who have the most federal workers in the country represent the voters in Northern Virginia, Don Beyer and Gerry Conley. So it is probably no huge surprise that Gerry Conley serves on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, a House committee that you may recall is chaired by the man who may have some problems with rodents in a charmed city, Elijah Cummings, who we mentioned before. Nor might you be surprised to learn that Gerry Conley is the chairman of the Subcommittee on Government, which oversees two important government agencies that every federal employee knows or should know: the Office of Personnel Management and the Merit Systems Protections Board. Get your checkbooks ready because a donation deadline has to be coming soon. Now, remember from history that we credit the founding of patronage jobs to the first Democrat Party president, Andrew Jackson, and Old Hickory. And when we think of the problems with patronage, we think of the big city bosses of Tammany Hall in New York, and this intriguing fellow from New Jersey, who you may or may not have heard of, the mayor of what has been called, even today, the most corrupt political machine in the Northeast, and where for decades federal law enforcement revived the abscam sting that you may have seen in the movie American Hustle with Jeremy Renner and Jennifer Lawrence. Yeah, the F-bomb nominee. And since 2002, they are still throwing corrupt politicians in jail who forgot that when a guy dressed like a sheik gives you a suitcase of money, it's not a good thing. Go to church, you're probably going to avoid that, but not in New Jersey. So, would it surprise and shock you to learn that a man born in Stanton, Virginia, down 81, if you continue down 66, you'll hit it. Stanton, Virginia, who we credit with ideas like the League of Nations that gave rise to the United Nations, was not only the 45th governor of New Jersey, but also placed in that office and sent to the White House, just like he had done for FDR, and had a personal bat phone to the president from his penthouse on what is today JFK Boulevard in Jersey City, New Jersey. Yes, Frank I Am the Law Hague, the most powerful and most corrupt political machine boss in the Northeast for decades, responsible also for electing the big reform Governor A. Harry Moore to 3 non-consecutive terms, the most of any governor in New Jersey history, during one absence in which the founder of the merit-based civil service, good old Woody, had the opportunity to keep his seat warm in Trenton. Why did what was it that Patrick Henry said? Give me, not that one. I smell a rat, right? Would it then surprise you to learn that if you are lucky enough to get a federal job, after following all of the articles and taking all the classes and getting a new resume and doing all those things to increase your chances of success, if only to compete with those veterans with the 5-point and 10-point preference, like service-connected disabled veterans, that's some looking out for you and accepting your donations Democrats like Don Beyer, Jerry Conley, Elijah Cummings, Tim Kaine, and even Mark Warner double-crossed you. Because there is no honor amongst thieves. And if you are up for a good collusion story, you will probably love this one. If you offer a bribe to a guy who refuses it, I don't know, call it religious reasons, you may have to cover it up. And that's what happened. The first thing that the guy is going to do is try to get evidence on the bribe, which is defined under our crime chapter 18 at 18 U.S.C. section 201, paragraph B, as an offer of a thing of value to a public official in exchange for an official act. And he might ask you to help him get information from the federal agency that offered the job, because remember that right to remain silent to avoid self-incrimination? The agency is probably not exactly waiting for you to ask if they committed a felony. I'm going to bet they're probably not, this is just a guess. And if you are the congressman who was involved, what are you also going to do? Probably not answer, right? Just like Congressman Beyer did. At his town hall on July 8th, 2019, at Wakefield High School, he even told about 100 educated and informed supporters that it was the first time that he had ever heard of such a thing. First time. Perhaps he did not talk to Tim Kaine, who was confident that he was going to get back on the bribe. We cannot say. But, and this is your big but, if you are lucky to get a stand-up guy like Mark Warner, you may actually get the information from the federal agency, who then are all too willing to assist, especially if they can prove that they were not responsible, but only following orders from someone over a national security defense intelligence agency, 3-star billet, that's 3-star general, lieutenant general, under a commander-in-chief, of which there is only one under my copy of the Constitution. But when you take all of this information that says that a scandal-free Democrat president on evidence beyond a reasonable doubt actually ordered a bribe, the second of only 2 specifically listed high crimes and misdemeanors in the Constitution for which you can be impeached, the federal employees who work at the Merit Systems Protections Board, Democrats, probably by party affinity, may want to lose that appeal up to maybe even 3 or 4 times before they acknowledge receipt. Maybe you'll forget about it, especially if 98% of the whistleblower cases are dismissed by them. And the exclusive court that was granted authority to review the appeals almost always rubber stamps those decisions. A fact that had House Republican Conference under Republican Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers from the state of Washington, Spokane, so concerned that she put together legislation to give federal employees a new court to present their appeals in 2012. They could go anywhere they wanted to, where they could find a federal circuit court in the country. If you were in California, you can go to California. If you were in Washington, you'd go to Washington. You did not have to even take that trip to D.C. to get your rights redressed. But if you don't have an attorney, and the Merit Systems Protections Board has made your process more convenient, like Democrat Delegate Rip Sullivan's plans for voting, and providing an online form where you, with no attorney, can just say what you want and hope it is the law, what is going to happen when an attorney working for the federal government and supporting Democrat candidates looks at your complaint? Ignorance is no excuse for the law. And over 6,000 appeals submitted each year find only about 300 survive to a hearing before the full board members appointed by the president to serve at the Merit Systems Protections Board since 1979 under the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. And nobody ever used the lifeboat that Republicans tried to give to whistleblowers to get a chance for due process and a fair trial in another circuit court, because only a lawyer or someone who is informed about the law would know that a law was passed by Republicans to help them. And so the statute went up as a trial program and came back down. And guess what happens if that board, by statute, requires at least 2 members? And right before a Not My President gets elected, not just one vacancy, but 2 suddenly occur. Those 300 cases per year start to compound with interest and pile up into a backlog. And since only government shutdowns make headlines that have people trying to feed federal government employees that are voting for Democrats, giving them money to Democrats because a Not My President is being bad, saying bad things, and not federal employees not getting their day in court, which is their guaranteed right under the Constitution, this might continue forever. But when an internationally notorious troublemaker comes along, Houston, we have a problem. And if you saw that movie, you know that failure is not an option, especially if he happened to come from New Jersey, Jersey City, in fact, Frank Hageland. And if his dad's best friend was the attorney who actually defended the guy who Jeremy Renner only played in the American Hustle movie. The big-time mayor in Camden County, where his father served as an assistant pastor at the Kane Avenue Baptist Church, and the county of his last known New Jersey residence and voting address. Even if a local attorney from Arlington, Virginia, actually Tyson's Corner law firm, upon due diligence, swore to a court that he was a resident of Morris County, New Jersey, when he was running against an Arlington County Democrat and blue Virginia endorsed candidate who was supported by former Democrat Congressman Jim Moran, the famed Intimidator. Well, across the river, immediately after the first lifeboat expired, the House Republican Conference offered Elijah Cummings, Democrat from Baltimore, a sweet deal, to have the chance to boast about passing legislation to support federal employees, making the lifeboat permanent with bipartisan support. And Elijah jumped at the opportunity, but did not bother to read it, apparently, because now he claims that only a staffer who no longer works in his office knew what it was trying to do. And that carpetbagger and deplorable first decided to appeal with a petition for review by the Board of the Merit Systems Protection Board that lacked a quorum, just as that new legislation, Elijah's legislation that he now no longer denies he knows anything about, had passed the House and was on its way to being approved by the Senate and on its way to be signed by a not my president. And Mark Robbins, who is now the general counsel or the top attorney at the Office of Personnel Management, but was then the last remaining board member, got a little nervous about the next move. So, as soon as he received the petition for review, he decided to whip out his pen and write a whole new policy to fix the problem. His policy, which was immediately forwarded to the old Jersey politician who still holds the record for a Republican candidate for state assembly in the most reliable Democrat district in the Garden State, and asked him to withdraw his timely received appeal in exchange for a final order that he could use to leave that adjudicative forum, closing the door permanently behind him while he tried to get into another court to hear his complaint to get the bribe investigated. Well, Mama didn't raise no fool, and he said, have a court tell me to do that. But a little thing that a person without a license to practice law does not know is that you can't get a favorable ruling appealed in hopes of getting something better. Or you can only appeal that which is printed on the order you received from the court. Bottom line, if you had gone to a court and requested to that court to grant you an order that said you could withdraw your appeal, and they granted your appeal that you had requested, you received exactly that for which you prayed. And that is not adverse to you. And you have voluntarily waived your rights upon request. And that's on you, because ignorance is no excuse under the law. But what makes it worse is that the guy who is now the head legal guru at the Office of Personnel Management, the people that employ you as a federal employee, gave that offer to everybody who wants to get their day in court. And he was so anxious that Mark Robbins did not even present the proposed policy in the Federal Register for public comment for 60 days, as required by the Administrative Procedures Act. What did they say about Watergate? It was not the third great burglary, but the cover-up, right? And none of this is in the Washington Post, believe it or not. And now, the House leadership of Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, Jim Clyburn, all know this happened and are not saying one word, because if federal employees found out, they might not vote for Democrats or give any campaign contributions. Ted Deutsch, chairman of the House Ethics Committee, won't investigate the first congressman to demand impeachment. Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, who you may have seen on television, who wanted to fine officials in the current administration $25,000 per day until they answer a subpoena, won't even accept delivery of the evidence of any parts of the bribe that former President Barack Obama ordered the Department of Justice to offer an intelligence procurement analyst job to a congressional candidate, because Congressman Schiff claims that felonies committed in the intelligence community are not within the oversight of his oversight jurisdiction. And seeking re-election, not even the stand-up guy Mark Warner, ranking Democrat on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, will initiate an Senate Ethics Committee investigation against his dear colleague Tim Kaine, while a liberal district court that actually repealed the provision of the Civil Rights Act that permitted colored folks to integrate lunch counters now has both matters on appeal to the Fourth Circuit, which is all out of your hands as a federal employee. Don't even worry about it. Go back to sleep. And if you can believe it, even though the Donald, The Apprentice, the See Me in the Boardroom guy has offered the Senate a full panel of nominees to end the longest lack of a quorum in history, now approaching 3 years. Before this, 3 weeks tops. Every Senate Democrat on the committee, accepting your votes, accepting your donations, has voted against the nominees just to protest. Like a Merit Systems Protections Board shutdown that's not even in the press at the expense of the rights to due process guaranteed to federal employees under the Constitution. Well, be sure that at least one Republican in the district with the most federal workers is concerned about this problem. And on behalf of a Not My President and to aid those federal employees to preserve their constitutionally guaranteed rights, we did some research to investigate this problem. If the Senate is responsible for advise and consent, remember that play movie, for all appointments, and if the Republicans control the Senate, what's the problem? Would you believe that every single Democrat has refused to vote the nominees out of the committee for no other stated reason than to thumb their noses at the president? And if the Republicans are in control of the Senate, we know that cannot occur without some defections, right? So, we are putting on our Henry Kissinger shuttle diplomacy hat and are arranging a meeting to pray for our one wayward brother and restore the quorum and get those nominees approved. You don't have to do a thing about that because we're on it, doggone it. But since democracy, big D, no, small d democracy, dies in darkness, and we know that you want to do your part, here is the plan if you don't like being played for a fool. Step 1. Stop supporting elected officials who are not looking out for your best interests. Don't be a fool. Don't donate to the campaigns. Don't volunteer for their events. Don't answer the phone when they call, and don't vote for them. If you can't vote for anyone who supports the president, you can't vote for the president, then just stay home. Go on vacation. Don't vote if that's what your conscience tells you to do. But step 2 is the most important step right now in a participatory democracy. Remember that public comment procedure that Mark Robbins, your new head legal guy at OPM, totally discarded? Well, under the Administrative Procedures Act and the policies under the Code of Federal Regulations for the Merit Systems Protections Board, we looked it up, research, any interested party can request a new policy, an amendment, or a repeal. That's right. Use that same process, which will be subjected to, guess what? A 60-day public comment period so that you can provide your public comments on the policy your attorney, Mark Robbins, decreed without your public comments the first time and before he took a job as the top attorney at the Office of Personnel Management, which y'all also might want to address on your own if you are concerned about who is your attorney deciding your legal matters in the job place, because you have, what do we call that? A hostile working environment. May not be sexual harassment in your case, but it's definitely hostile if there ever was one. Just remember, we are praying for you. And so in November, it is a referendum election where you have the power to choose between the party of manumission, slavery, oppression, Jim Crow, and subjugation, or to choose the party of emancipation. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of welfare entitlement and government dependency, or the party of opportunity. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of underperforming public schools and achievement gaps, or the party of school choice. You have the power to choose between the party of mandatory union membership or the party of a right to work. You have the power to choose between the party of universal socialized medicine or the party that will let you choose your provider and your doctor and your insurance plan. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of awaiting the arrival of law enforcement or the party of the right to stand your ground and defend yourself. In November, you have the power to choose between the party of higher taxes and growing bureaucracies or the power of lower taxes and self-determination. It is your party and it is your choice. I am a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican, in that order. And I am not ashamed of the gospel. My name is Major Mike Webb, and I am running for U.S. Congress. Not unmindful of the future, with liberty and excellence, let's make America great again. Honest. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.